Hey folks, Donnie and Spence here from Horsepower for an Hour. We're out here at our Horsepower Performance Division and we're talking performance. I think everyone, or most people would agree, driving a car that performs well can be a lot of fun.
Sure.
On the other hand, if you're driving a car that doesn't perform well, it can be frustrating. One of the things that you can do to make certain that your car is operating at peak performance is to maintain the fuel system. Fuel delivery is everything, folks. One of the products that we've been using here exclusively at our Horsepower Performance Division for many, many years is the Berryman B12 Chemtool. It works fantastic. As you'll see here in our video shortly, you'll see what the fuel trims look like when a fuel injector is not functioning correctly, and then what it looks like when one does function correctly. We're going to be looking at fuel trims. And so one of the things that we get often on our radio show, Spencer, you know, we get calls all the time, how can I make my car perform better? Or a situation will arise where whenever I try to take off from a traffic light or I try to accelerate, the car stumbles, it doesn't perform as well as it did when I bought it. That's a telltale sign that you have poor fuel delivery, something going on with respect to the fuel getting into the engine. But it's not just for performance cars. I mean, you get calls all the time. You tried it in a 2005 or 2006 Scion.
I tried it on a Scion that had 200,000 miles on it. It started to drive just a little rough, a little hesitant. What do you expect after 200,000 miles? The thing is, I got to bury this car. It's going to cost a lot of cash to get it fixed. I'm going to have to bring it into a shop. Ended up, Donnie, you gave me 1 can of Berryman B12, and instantly I saw the differences. And then the rule of thumb is every 4 tanks, full tanks, I add this, and it's a very, very economical way. When you look at the bang for the buck, you're getting great prices on gasoline right now. Why not take full advantage and make your car run even more efficiently by using Berryman B12?
And another point I'd like to make is when the fuel system is not operating at peak performance, you are dropping raw fuel usually into the catalytic converter. That can create all sorts of problems, but one thing is the catalytic converters can be very expensive. If you burn one out prematurely, it can be upwards of $1,000, in some cases over $1,000. So not only are you spending more money at the pump, not only are you costing yourself poor performance, but you're also setting yourself up for future automotive repairs, exhaust repairs that can be quite expensive. So as we're going to see here in a moment, the fuel trims is how we judge as fuel trims, is how we can identify how well a fuel system is working. So we're going to see in a moment just how well that does work. A negative fuel trim typically indicates that there's a flooding in the fuel system, and usually that's because the fuel injector, for whatever reason, is not fully closing or it's not pulsing correctly. When we see a negative fuel trim, as we see here in this illustration, that typically tells us that there's something wrong in a fuel injector, and most times it's because there's carbon, some sort of a fuel deposit that's causing the injector to stay open. So as you saw earlier in our scanner, you saw that we have negative fuel trims of about 18, I think it was negative 16, negative 18. That tells us that the computer is trying to remove 18% of the fuel that's being delivered to get to the stoichiometric ratio of 14.7 to 1. It sounds scientific, but it's pretty simple. Essentially what happens here is when a fuel injector is clogging, it is dropping raw fuel into the engine. When that occurs, again, we create all kinds of problems for ourselves with respect to catalytic converters and so on and so forth. Right now, this Denali is running off pure Berryman B12 Chemtool. We have eliminated all of the fuel from the tank. Everything is shut off from the fuel tank. It is running strictly and primarily off Berryman B12. The nice thing about this is Berryman is such a high volume and high intense cleanser. It is pushing 45 pounds of air pressure along with atomized B12 Chemtool through the injector to clear that carbon, to clear that obstruction, to clear some of that dirt and debris that's creating a problem for our negative fuel trim. After we're done here, we'll take another look at the scanner and we should see at or near 0% on our fuel trims. That's the goal. At that point in time, we know we're burning fuel most efficiently. At 0, it's perfect, and we know we're not doing any long-term damage to our catalytic converter. So those things, those two things alone should be proof positive and should be more than enough motivation to want to use B12, to use some sort of a chem tool. I like the B12. We've used it for so many years. It performs well for us each and every time.
Well, Donnie, one of the questions that we get here at Horsepower for an Hour, and this is where Berryman B12 really works in perfectly in the conversation. So often we have people keeping their cars 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years now. This is the product that's really going to help you out with that when you have a car that hits 100,000, 150,000, and 200,000 miles. Run efficiently and save money and keep your motor running for, who knows, 250, 300,000 miles.
Yes, you know, I like Spence's approach to that, and that's very good. In fact, not only does it work well for the here and the now, also going to give you longevity over the 200,000 to 250,000 miles. It keeps the top of the engine clean, keeps those valves nice and clean, keeps that injector rail clean, keeps those injectors pulsing exactly as they should, spraying an atomized fuel as opposed to just dropping raw fuel in a liquid form. Because remember, folks, fuel doesn't burn when it's a liquid, only when it's a vapor. So you're going to want to make sure that those fuel injectors are working most efficiently, and the best way to do that is to keep them maintained. Berryman B12 Chemtool works excellent. As we see now in this illustration, the fuel trims are at or near zero, and that's really what we want. Now we know that the injector is firing correctly, it's pulsing correctly, and the computer is not having to adjust any sort of fuel delivery. This is exactly what we want to see when we're looking at fuel trim values. Berryman B12 Chemtool and virtually all of the Berryman product line is available at automotive suppliers across the country. You can check them out at AutoZone or participating distributors in your area.